You've seen politicians take on the media, but what happens when the media tries to manipulate the narrative and someone decides to turn the tables? Today, in yet another press conference that promises to be historic, Karoline Leavitt, the government's new spokesperson, won't just answer questions. She'll expose the hypocrisy of the press. The press conference was about to begin. Reporters were adjusting their microphones and fine-tuning their notes with anticipation. They knew that Karoline Leavitt would not be like the other spokespeople who had come through the door. Not only did she have a reputation for being fiercely intelligent, but she had also made it clear that she would not bow to media conventions. "Good afternoon, everyone," Karoline said into the microphone, her voice clear and precise. "I know many of you have come with questions ready, so let's get right to it. Before we begin, I want to clarify something. The media often chooses which words become threats and which are just words. Today, I'm going to show you that the difference is not in what is said, but in who is saying it." The reporters began to whisper among themselves, which was quickly silenced by Karoline. She wasn't there to joke around. She was there to expose the contradictions that everyone knew existed, but no one dared to comment on. "You expected me to come here and be easily attacked, didn't you?" she continued, looking confidently at the journalists in front of her. "I'm not here to defend ideas or words. I'm here to defend the truth." Karoline's first provocation was just the beginning. The first attack came from Peter, one of CNN's most veteran reporters, who was ready to unsettle her. He raised his hand and, with a confident smile, asked, "Karoline, are you suggesting that Congresswoman Maria Souza is inciting violence?" Karoline looked at him, calm as ever. "I'm not suggesting anything, Peter. I'm just repeating your words. We need to fight in the streets. And I want to know, why is it that when she says that, it becomes a call for justice, but when someone on the opposite side does the same, it's classified as incitement to violence?" Peter hesitated. It was clear he was not prepared for this line of questioning. But, like a seasoned reporter, he quickly tried to return to the offensive. "But Karoline, context is important, don't you think? Maria Souza wasn't calling for violence. She was calling for action." "Ah, the old context trick," Karoline interrupted with a wry smile. "When opposition figures say something like that, you call for investigations, you question their intentions. But when it's your wing, you talk about resistance. Make no mistake, Peter, the narrative is already set." The press room was now enveloped in an uncomfortable silence. The press conference was far from being a simple exchange of questions and answers. It was now a battle of narratives. Karoline continued, "It's not about context, Peter. It's about something much simpler. Who is allowed to speak? Who is allowed to use these words? If Donald Trump said, 'Let's fight in the streets,' you would be calling for his arrest, his conviction. But when Maria Souza does this, it's just another legitimate statement of political outrage." The room was completely silent. Everyone knew that the confrontation with the media was just beginning. The reporters tried to adjust their questions, trying to regain control of the narrative. But Karoline had already begun to turn the tables. The media, which had always seen itself at the center of the stories it told, was now being challenged. "Let's talk about Donald Trump," an NBC reporter said, trying to steer the conversation back to familiar ground where she thought she might undermine Karoline's confidence. "He's been criticized for his rhetoric, especially after the attack on the Capitol. How do you justify that?" "Ah, Donald Trump," Karoline said with a subtle but defiant smile. "I knew this was coming. What else do you have against him? You say he incites violence with every word that comes out of his mouth. But let's look at the reality here. When Trump said, 'Make your voices heard in a peaceful and patriotic manner,' the media took those words and twisted them to suggest he was inciting a revolution. But what happens when left-wing figures like Maria Souza say the exact same thing? The context is justice, resistance, same rhetoric, but different treatment." She paused to let her words sink in. "Because Trump spoke directly, and that made you lose control. He is a threat because he does not fit the narrative you are trying to shape." The tension in the room was rising. Reporters were beginning to realize that they were, in fact, being challenged to question the very way they had approached political figures on opposing sides. But the pressure was mounting. How to respond? How to deal with someone who was not just answering questions, but rewriting the rules of the press conference? Karoline's wordplay continued. She turned the tables completely by exposing the way the media covered certain politicians. Look at Ilhan Omar. When she said, "Fight in the streets," the media treated her like a hero, a political figure fighting against an unjust system. But when someone from another political spectrum, like Trump, talks about taking action, you applaud the investigation of his every word. You create a narrative of incitement, but ignore the same rhetoric in other contexts. Karoline looked around the room, her defiant, piercing gaze making reporters sweat with discomfort. What we're seeing here is not just a difference in ideologies. We're seeing a manipulative narrative, a war of words where some figures are treated as villains and others as martyrs. And I'm here to show how false that is. A reporter from a major news network tried again. "Karoline, all you're saying is that the words of a right-wing politician should be viewed in the same light as those of a left-wing politician? Don't you think there's a real difference between the ideologies?" "This is not about ideology, my friend," Karoline replied pointedly. "This is about consistency. It's not about who is saying it. It's about what is being said. When one side speaks, it is treated one way. When the other side speaks, it is treated another. And this has to stop." The reporters, now clearly disconcerted, no longer knew how to react. They were being challenged in a way they had never expected. The entire room seemed to be in suspense, waiting for the next move. In an unexpected move, Karoline paused and, with a subtle smile, launched one last provocation. "Let me ask you something. What would happen if Trump said it's time to fight in the streets? Wouldn't that be enough to draw the cries of a nation in distress? Wouldn't there be impeachment, investigations, incessant coverage?" She looked around the room. "But when Ilhan Omar says that, we don't hear any of your reactions. She's not being investigated. She's not being tried. And the worst part is, you know it." She placed her hand on the table, looking directly at the CNN reporter. "I see what's going on here, and this is what you don't want the public to know. The real problem isn't the words. The problem is the person saying them." And so the press conference continued, with Karoline Leavitt dismantling a narrative that the media had built over the years. Every answer she gave, every provocation she launched, made it clear to everyone that the rules of the game had changed. By the time the press conference was over, Karoline knew that what she had done there wasn't just about her or the administration. It was about the media, the way it twists words, the way it manipulates the narrative, and the way it chooses who will be the villain and who will be the hero. Karoline looked directly into the camera and, with a calm smile, said, "Now, the question remains, what do you, the common citizen, think of this? Do you want to live in a society where a word spoken by one side is seen as violence, and by the other side, as resistance? Let's put an end to this manipulation. Like this video, subscribe for more content like this, and leave your comment below. The battle of words is just beginning." The tension in the room rose with every word Karoline Leavitt said. She was no longer just answering questions. She was rewriting the rules of the game. When the NBC reporter tried to interrupt her train of thought, she silenced her with a simple hand gesture. "You talk about politics as if it were a matter of simple ideology, but it goes much deeper than that," Karoline said, her voice calm but sharp. "What we are seeing is not an ideological struggle, but a struggle of narrative. And as you well know, the media has the power to control who will be the villain and who will be the hero." The reporters looked at each other, aware that this was no ordinary press conference. It was a spectacle, a battle where, on one side, there were the journalists, armed with their questions and their certainties. On the other side, Karoline was destroying their certainties, one piece at a time. A young Fox News reporter, apparently determined to continue the attack, raised his hand. He knew that with every minute Karoline spoke, his credibility as a journalist was falling further and further. This wasn't just a confrontation with Karoline. It was a confrontation with a narrative he and his colleagues had sustained for so long. "Karoline, you're suggesting that the media has been controlling the narrative regarding politics. But if that's the case, what about the behavior of former President Donald Trump, who often used his position to attack journalists, accusing them of being fake or spreading fake news? How does that fit into your theory?" Karoline smiled slightly, her confidence unshakable. "Oh, Peter, it's funny how when Trump defended himself, the media treated him like a monster. But when others do the same, it's just a legitimate reaction. Let me explain something. Yes, Donald Trump criticized the media, but that's no different than what other politicians do. What sets Trump apart is that he doesn't hide behind empty phrases and polite words. He speaks directly, without fear of being attacked. She paused, allowing her words to take shape. And, contrary to what the media would have you believe, he wasn't inciting violence. He was inciting reflection. He was telling people to think for themselves and question what they were being forced to believe. The room was divided. Some reporters were frantically taking notes. Others were avoiding Karoline's gaze. They knew she had just turned the narrative against them, yet again. The discomfort was palpable. Some of them were beginning to realize that they had underestimated Karoline's ability to defend herself and control the narrative. Another reporter, a veteran of the Washington Post, tried once again to regain control of the narrative. He knew that if Karoline kept up this line of reasoning, the administration and Trump would emerge victorious in the battle for truth. Karoline, you claim that the media has been inconsistent in its treatment of public figure speeches. But you cannot deny that, in many cases, the former president incited extremism. What about the events of January 2021? That cannot be explained as a common reaction. This is more serious than any usual political rhetoric. Karoline looked at him, a gleam of understanding in her eyes. She had known the question was coming, and she knew exactly how to disarm it. Ah, yes, January 2021, when the media made Trump's every word a sentence of guilt. But again, let's put this in context. What did Trump say before that event? He called on his supporters to demonstrate peacefully and be patriotic. And what happened? A handful of people disregarded that and did the unthinkable. Now tell me, James, if other politicians like Ilhan Omar talk about fighting in the streets, that's not inciting violence. But if Trump talks about taking action, does he become responsible for every act of extremism? What's the logic here? She paused, then, in a more serious tone, added, "Do you see the inconsistency, James? You're not addressing this issue objectively. The problem here is not what Trump said. The problem is how the media twists the words of certain individuals to align with their narrative. And that has to stop." Karoline knew that James could not answer convincingly, because she was, once again, exposing the media's fallacy. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The press conference, until then just a space for questions and answers, now became an arena for the public exposure of the lies that the media had constructed. The BBC journalist, in a last-ditch effort to turn the situation around, asked, "Karoline, you talk a lot about the media's manipulation of words, but don't you think the rhetoric of figures like Trump also has a profound impact on the polarization we're seeing today?" Karoline took a deep breath, but didn't hesitate. Of course, any politician's rhetoric has an impact. But the question isn't whether Trump's rhetoric has polarized or not. The question is that while some are labeled as extremists, others are treated as heroes. The difference lies in who has the power to control the narrative and shape public opinion. Because in the end, when the media chooses who will be the villain and who will be the hero, what we are witnessing is not journalism. It is manipulation. The room fell silent. Karoline Leavitt had exposed the real battle, a war for truth, where the media used its power to manipulate the public and control the debate. And now, everyone in the room was seeing it clearly. Looking straight into the camera, Karoline gave a firm, unhesitating smile. "So, what do you think about all this? Has the media been honest in the way it has covered recent events, or are we being massively misled? If you're starting to see what is really going on, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. The battle for truth is just beginning, and we cannot allow ourselves to be manipulated. Let's put an end to hypocrisy once and for all."